Hello there, and welcome to Andre's YouTube video for Thursday, November 15th, 2012. Well, for the past 10 months, I have been becoming more and more interested in Doctor Who. It was something I knew about, but had barely watched beforehand. And it's really gotten me back into thinking about a lot of the interests I used to have in time and space and science fiction and science in general. Now, when I was a young boy, I was very, very interested in space exploration. I seriously considered going to space camp to become an astronaut. I was a huge Trekkie. I love movies like 2010, and that extended well into my adolescence. And I would describe myself as dreamy, in fact, very dreamy in the way I thought about things. Then along came the 90s, and this is something that I've often discussed. We came into an era of skepticism, talking about the moon landing being faked, and why should we go into space when there are so many social problems to be solved on Earth. Now, I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about some of the new ideas that have been awakened in my mind by watching Doctor Who, strictly on the matter of just general maturity, I suppose, and understanding a little bit more about what I'm seeing as opposed to when I was a child. Doctor Who, for all of you who have never seen the show or know very little about it, is basically about a Time Lord from another world and another time who travels around in a device through all of time and space that is dimensionally transcendental. Bigger on the inside, physically, than on the outside. The dimensions are different. And at the time of death, he is capable of regenerating his body a number of times. That hasn't really been specified yet. And he has different companions, usually human ones, that he travels with. Now, this is a very spacious and very limitless basis on which to build a TV show, which is usually defined by limits. But the point of my video isn't about limits. It's about how we limit ourselves. And one of the things that Doctor Who has awakened in my mind is, what would all of us do if we had our own lives to live over, knowing what we know now? Like his regeneration process. Now, I'm going to digress quite a bit from Doctor Who to talk about what kind of thoughts the program has brought up in my mind for the past 10 months. And here are my conclusions. I have begun to have a greater understanding of how time works. Not in terms of scientific theory, but in terms of how it works for life itself, how we live life. And I'm going to make it as simple as possible. I have a lot of more abstract thoughts in my mind, but I'll put it simply, not to pull some sort of power play or ego trip, but my mind tends to be a little bit complicated and obtuse about some things, so I'll try to make it less so, because I want to communicate this thought as well as possible. My perception of time after watching Doctor Who in human terms, especially American human terms, I'm an American, I'm not from England, is this. In those terms, time seems to exist to me now in this manner, and this is what it represents. The past represents lack of knowledge. The idea that the Earth was flat, that the speed of sound could not be achieved, or even in more recent decades, the idea that putting a bit of paper on your head or ducking and covering underneath a desk would protect you from a nuclear explosion that would represent the energy released by untold thousands or millions of tons of TNT. The present, the place we are right now, would seem to represent uncertainty and fear. And I'll get into that a little bit later. And the future represents progress. Okay, those are fairly simple ideas, but it's gotten me to wonder. When I go to a video store, to look for an old video, an old film by Woody Allen or Orson Welles or whatever, you just don't see it anymore. Blockbuster or any of those places like that tend to cater only to the things that are the newest, that are in the present, and tends to leave the past out a bit. Also, you'll notice that we do tend to have a lot more computerized things in our society. Computerized cell phones, computers are getting more and more artificial and more self-sufficient, less reliant on us. It's becoming more of a computer world, and that's just a fact of the matter. And people's response to that, it tends to be not how to make it more humanistic, but how to, let's say, return to the life of, say, Southern agrarians, who saw the automobile as a symbol of the country falling to bits, and they believe they're right. Now, these people assume, well, we have too much computerization, too much technology, let's return to the horse and buggy, let's all become farmers, let's cast off any idea of knowledge or intellectualism, and just embrace hard work, a mind that's weak, and a back that's strong. That's basically what it comes down to. I mean, you can dress it up any way you want. And that's what the present seems to be about. Uncertainty and fear. And it tends to want to embrace the past more. And the past, for all intents and purposes, based in lack of knowledge. Or to use a less kind word, ignorance. Okay? And ignorance is something you can't buy. And ignorance is something that you can't sell. It's something that you learn. And it's something that's passed down the generations, like racial segregation in the American South. A lot of people during that time that was happening, which was in the past, did not believe that that was a bad thing. And they didn't really have any moral, connections to that. It was just tradition. It was something they felt comfortable with. It's like, this is going to be a big one, so be prepared. Religion in the modern age. I agree with John Lennon. I think that mass Christianity is very fast outliving its usefulness in society, at least in terms of how it reacts with how our world works. We happen to know for a fact the world is not one big construct and everything in the universe revolves around it. That's what religion told us. And we're learning more and more things against it. And it's become more about power and achievement now than it's actually become around moral guidance to the world. We have other sources of moral guidance. Our families, our friends, and there's all kinds of different things. Now, in terms of the future, that would be an idea that a number of friends of mine have called futurism, or living in a future paradise. There was one period of time before I was around where that was a very significant thing, futurism, in the 1960s. Okay? People imagined us living in a more energy efficient and more egalitarian world, where everybody were aware of each other's differences, but were able to live equally anyway. And where wind and air and the things that existed naturally around us were the sources of energy, not something that would pollute our planet. They imagined a great society, as President Johnson once called it, a perfect world, or whatever. That was living in a future paradise. That would have been embracing progress. But over the years, steadily, with world events becoming the way they are, and society, I think, really becoming more and more conservative in its thinking, not politics, but conservative in its thinking, are becoming fearful of the future. They don't see the future in terms of efficiency and egalitarianism. They see the future in terms of things like global warming, the planet coming to an end, conspiracy theories, 2012, the world ending, Y2K. The future has become about endings and death and destruction. And that's a very cynical attitude. And I saw it myself personally go down when I was a teenager. And it hung me up. It really brought me down to a very low level where I could barely raise my hand to pick up a fork to eat, to be honest with you. It was very soul-destroying. And I've talked about this again and again and again. But to be honest, when I first started watching Doctor Who and watching this Time Lord going through time and seeing things in the terms I just mentioned that, and in his own words, progress is a very flexible word, that it can mean anything you want it to. That he opened his mind to the future rather than closed it, and brought in human companions like Sarah Jane Smith or the Brigadier, Lethbridge Stewart, and for the Third Doctor, or whoever, and help them to understand their own cynicism and, get out of their own little small concerns and realize that their lives affected untold billions around them because of their thoughts on futurism, and how the past, the future, and the present were all very mutually exclusive, and we couldn't go back like a Time Lord could in our real life in order to make something we want to have happen. That we have to make it happen in our present so it'll improve in our future. It may seem like a complicated idea, but here's how I feel about what we should do in society now with seeing Doctor Who and how things progress in that show. Instead of worrying about the technology and the physical development of humanity and how it'll affect our future, and therefore retreating into the past as a form of comfort and familiarity, I really am convinced now that we should in fact embrace these new developments in our technology and allow our wisdom to grow as much as the things we create. So we will therefore have the wisdom to be able to use them productively and not allow technology to take over us. Because I think that humanity and technology can exist in a world that's very mutually exclusive. Like the Doctor in his TARDIS, he has implied that that device he uses to travel through time and space is very much alive, and that he is connected to it. It's a very, I wouldn't say humanistic, but a very positive method of using technology. He's still himself. He's still very much a living being, and the TARDIS is very much connected to him. I'm not saying we should all hook ourselves up to machines. I'm just saying that we should have more control of them and not allow them to control us because of our cynicism and our desires to live in a pastime world of ignorance and of lack of knowledge. And that's just the impressions on wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey that Doctor Who has given me. And I'm sure many of you have simpler or more complex thoughts than that. But that's just my 2 cents for that for the moment. So keep on going, keep on trucking, and, keep on progressing. The past is there as a friend and a guidepost, but the sky's the limit for your future. Enjoy it, and it's whatever you make it. So as they say in Back to the Future, another sci-fi movie, make your future a good one. Talk to you next time.